Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, September 20th, 2019 meeting of the Circuit 13 Juvenile Justice Advisory Board. If everyone could please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, well, I want to welcome everybody to our meeting this month and appreciate everybody for being here. A couple of housekeeping items. Our secretary, Ms. Cristiano, is on vacation and unable to join us. Judge Twine Thomas is in a trial, and she's unable to join us as well. And Captain Hollis and Lieutenant Rashke are conducting some interviews for some open positions within their unit, and so they're not going to be able to join us either. And lastly, our court administrator, Miss Gina Justice, had another commitment, is unable to join us, but we have Miss Boatwright here in her stead. So, as we normally do, we typically start the meetings by doing some introductions around the table, and I'd like to do that now. If we can start with Mr. Minzy over here.
How you doing? Good morning. My name's Patrick Minzy. I'm with Hillsborough County Children's Services Operations.
Keith Babb with One More Child.
Noel Johnson with Project Link.
Pat McGee, Department of Juvenile Justice Prevention.
Samicia Bagley, Safe and Sound Hillsborough.
Jeremy Bacon, Tampa Police Department School Resource.
Gary White with the Hillsborough County Anti-Drug Alliance. Thanks.
Elvin Martinez Jr. with Bays, Florida.
Kelly Hammersley, Juvenile Justice Probation.
Natalie Steiner, JDAI Coordinator for Circuit 13.
Rob Parkinson, Hillsborough County Criminal Justice.
Chrissy Dorian, Hillsborough County Public Schools.
Yvette Boatwright, Court Administration.
Okay, thank you all. And I'd like to welcome our new JDAI coordinator to the table. We're happy to have you. And excellent job to everybody for speaking into the microphone. Thank you very much. If everybody's had an opportunity, and before we move on to the agenda, if there are any members of the public that wish to address the Juvenile Justice Board, we've got a public comment section on our agenda towards the end of the meeting, and we do have a sign-in public comment sign-up sheet, and I would ask you to please fill that out if you are intending to make any comments during the public comment section of our agenda. So with that, if everybody's had an opportunity to review the minutes of our July meeting, I would entertain a motion to approve or amend the minutes.
A motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any debate? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you very much. The minutes have been adopted. And we will move on to board priorities. And the first item on that agenda is our Public Service Award, which, as you all know, we intend to select a nominee over the next month or so and present that nominee with a Public Service Award, a first annual Public Service Award at our November meeting in 2 months. So we happen to have Ms. McGee and Mr. White here, who have done a fine job of kind of corralling that whole process. And I don't know if either of you would care to give an update, or I'll just keep on talking, whatever you want to do.
Well, we'll be merciful. I'll
Thank
give
you.
an update. No, I'm kidding. We have had one nomination thus far, and just so you know that we are the nominations are still open until September 25th, and we'll be able to bring you an update soon. But yes, we have one right now, maybe, and another update maybe.
I'm sorry, maybe we should have gotten together earlier, but we have actually 3.
Oh, okay, good. Well, you can see where I've been.
So we've currently have 3 nominations for the Public Service Award, And in your packet today with the agenda, there is also a copy of the nomination form. I've also included that in our public notices and also in the information that I shared yesterday regarding the packet for today's meeting. So obviously, if you need a nomination form and you don't have it or can't find it, just let us know, and one of the three of us will send that to you. It's a pretty simple form. And again, the idea is to nominate folks who work directly with children in the juvenile justice system, because we have such dedicated professionals that dedicate their life and their profession to working with the juvenile justice population, but they largely go unnoticed in our community for the work they do every day. And they choose to work in this profession because they have a sense of calling to do this. And so the board feels as though it's necessary, not only necessary, but appropriate to recognize them. So we intend to recognize one juvenile direct service provider, professional, annually for the work that they do within our community. So any questions, reach out to Mr. White or Ms. McGee or myself, and we will help you along the way. The executive committee, the plan is for the executive committee the nominating committee to review the applications and make a recommendation to the executive committee in October. And then that will give us time to get all our ducks in a row for the November presentation. Any questions? Okay, we'll move on to community connections. And there's really no update. I'm kind of keeping that on our agenda as a placeholder because, of course, we have decided as a body that we want to support ACTS in their endeavors to expand the services within their campus on Dixon Avenue. And so we'll continue to communicate with Asha regarding that particular issue.
Elvin, just
Yes.
one thing to add. It appears as if the innovation project at the Blue Ribbon Commission on Child Welfare, their innovation project seems to have some of the principles of the community connection centers that have been adopted in that agreement between the county and DCF and Deckard. So I think it's something we're going to need to keep an eye on to make sure we're not creating parallel efforts. Because, with the Community Connection Center, I think there was a lot of discussion about having primary and prevention services there on site. And it appears as some of those services are going to be located at this separate center that's going to be off of Falkenberg. So again, we should keep an eye on it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Okay, the Evening Reporting Center and Detention Services. I had the privilege of attending the Detention Advisory Committee meeting a couple weeks ago, and I have to tell you that it's very admirable, the work that's being done. Freddie Barton is heading up that committee, and Ms. Blumberg is the secretary, and we met at the detention center. And the staff is doing an amazing job of trying to refurbish the detention center, and they're, quite frankly, doing a lot of the work on their own and with very few resources. So the Detention Advisory Committee, we talked about dedicating a day where we would try to gather some resources and some manpower and go and help them out there. So that's one of the things that's in the works. And I also know that Mr. Barton is still working on the Evening Reporting Center at Kings Forest, I believe, right? And so there's more information to come on that. It's still kind of in the developmental stage, but those are a couple of things that we're still working on. But the Detention Advisory Committee is really a great group, and anybody that's interested in receiving additional information about that, Ms. Blumberg, I'm sure, could notify you of the dates that they meet and the locations and that type of thing. But I encourage everybody to support that effort because the staff is absolutely being creative and trying to infuse services into the detention center, as opposed to just having the children sit around and not receive any type of services or activities. So they're being very creative, and I look forward to remaining engaged with that committee. Ms. Blumberg?
Yes, sorry to interrupt Mr. Martinez, but I just wanted to make sure that I share that Mr. Barton has worked very hard to put together an event on September 24th at which we will be entertaining, I believe it's 8 to 12 Buccaneers players, as well as some of their staff and administration. They're going to be coming into the detention center. We're going to be doing some various work groups with them, actually with the players, including Mike Evans, who, if anyone knows the Buccaneers and knows Mike Evans, he has a very compelling story that will absolutely speak to the heart of these young men and women. And so I just wanted to make sure that you all are aware of that coming in September on the 24th. So, and kudos to Freddie, who obviously isn't here, and his partner, Samicia, in that outreach program to getting that done for us, so.
Sarah, what time?
That is starting at 10 a.m. at the detention center. And those who are coming in are largely volunteers who will be kind of helping the youth get from different, from station to station. And there will be the Buccaneers players, some of their administration, the owner of the Buccaneers will be there, as well as a reporter from ESPN. So
Tampa Bay Times as well.
Tampa Bay Times is coming now as well. So just wanted to share that as part of what we've been doing with the Detention Advisory Board, so.
Nice.
Thank you.
Alvin, I do have an update regarding the ERC.
Yes, ma'am.
Recently, there was a meeting to see where we're at with the process, and although the department can support $100,000 for the funding of the ERC in Hillsborough County would also have to find a way to sustain it. And the funding must go through the county agency since it was not put out for competitive procurement. At this point, our plan has not been finalized. We are still working towards funding, and it may not actually come to fruition in 2019. We may have to look at 2020 as far as our funding sources within the county for the next fiscal budget, what have you. So that's the information I have on ERC.
Thank you very much. And if anything's true about the juvenile justice community, we're a very tenacious group of people. So a slight delay, I think, is just typical for our regular course of business. But don't expect us to go away, Ms. Hammersley.
No, sir.
That's right.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on to the Ad Hoc Committee on Juvenile Justice, on the Juvenile Justice System report card. And I want to thank Mr. Parkinson for his leadership in this particular area and for really his assistance in helping us move this along. I apologize in advance, Mr. Parkinson, but I'm going to relocate to the podium as you're giving your report. So I'll try not to be disruptive, but I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. The subcommittee met on August 15th. There was lots of good discussion. Basically, we assimilated all the information that we were given from the stakeholders, and we came up with a number of metrics that we would want to capture on an annual report card. And they're reflected in the handout that you have in front of you. Looks like this. Starting with Section 4, we really wanted to look at a 10-year period going from 2009 to 2019. As a group, we felt that that's the period that will really capture some of the significant changes that have occurred, things like civil citation and all the expansions we've had, some of our concerted efforts to divert youth. Obviously, the DJJ's roadmap was during that time period as well, and we felt that would be the most appropriate time period to measure the change in the system and dynamic improvements. In terms of what we wanted to capture, a variety of metrics, not only intakes and arrests, but civil citation utilization and other alternatives that we might use. Recidivism, I know we look at it from a year, but law enforcement wants to look at it at longer periods of time. Significant youth crime trends. We've had some ebbs and flows in certain crime trends. Obviously, grand theft auto has been a significant issue in the past and tends to pop up from time to time. Last year and this year, we've been concerned with burglary of firearms, that kind of thing. So we really wanted to look at the trends and see if there's any long-term patterns that we can discern. In terms of the longitudinal profile of DJJ and DCF, dually served crossover youth, because there's another group actually there's two groups looking at that, our other committee and the Blue Ribbon Committee. We just want to look at the data. We want to capture that in a longitudinal method, again, a 10-year period, because what we've seen as we looked at the data is the numbers of those youth is pretty constant over the last 10 years, but we want to be able to reflect that in a very overt way. In terms of the factors impacting strategic system improvements, we thought it was important to capture statutory, political, and policy changes that have occurred. Again, a lot of innovative practices have been developed over the years. We want to look at the value to the stakeholders, our citizens, our youth, state, county, and local government, law enforcement, a state attorney, public defender, and DJJ. We want to look at the prevention services that have evolved over the years. Specialty court development has had a significant impact on our system, especially delinquent crossover court, juvenile drug court, and of course our new juvenile mental health court. We also wanted to look at the impact that our recent SINS-FINS changes have had. Civil citation expansion, including the expanded eligibility efforts and DV SINS-FINS intervention development. We also wanted to account for the revised detention risk assessment instrument and the expanded detention continuum of care. We want to look at Hillsborough direct file rates, the impact that the juvenile sex offender unit has had at the PD's office, which has been significant. And we want to look at to the degree that the system has adopted risk-need responsivity principles and practices across the board. That is an emerging best practice that we really haven't utilized to the greatest extent that we could. And of course, we want to have a significant discussion about the Juvenile Assessment Center as a single point and the innovations that that has created. So that's in a nutshell. It's a lot to ask, and I've had some dialogue with Dr. Dembo, and if we cover all that, it's going to be very expensive. So we'll probably have to pare it down. But those discussions are ensuing. So I'll take any questions that anyone has.
Mr. Benjamin, would you mind coming up here?
Thank you so much, Elvin. Rob, one question I had was, one thing I didn't see on here with all the list of the excellent work you've done is a couple of things. First is the number of youth that have obtained employment through the juvenile justice system is one. The other one is what's the follow-up period of time that are currently being assessed now for the juvenile once they complete the program?
So overall recidivism for instance, civil citation, we're looking at a year, and we really don't track data past that year, and there's some reasons for that. There's some logistical issues, and a lot of it is dependent on the statutory authorization for the program, how it's funded, et cetera. So we got good data on a year, not so much after that, so we're going to have to look at other data sources. We might even talk about maybe doing some random moment samplings where we pick some individual cases and track them through the adult system. Hopefully we don't find them in the adult system. That is a real possibility, but that is a good way to longitudinally look at this target population. Of course, our hope is that they're not moving into the adult system. And before you ask your follow-up question, as far as juvenile employment, we really don't have a good, consistent data source on that, because a lot of the juvenile employment services are provided through primary prevention providers.
Okay.
And they're funded through a variety of sources, whether it be DJJ or the county or DCF, but there's no central data source that captures that. And I think that's going to be a common theme even with Elvin's presentation or the Blue Ribbon Commission's presentation and report. We don't have consolidated data on kids in the DCF and the DJJ system.
Right.
And especially for things like that, which is,
Right.
employment services, educational services. These are all resiliency factors that prevent a kid from coming back in the system, but we don't do a good job of capturing that.
Right, okay. One final question real quickly is, I understand that there might be a possibility that DJJ is looking into doing a vocational career site thing sometime at some point.
So I haven't heard that. Have you heard that?
No, I'm not aware of that, sir.
I have to say, with some of the changes that have occurred at CareerSource, my hope is that they would be more receptive, and I know you're on their board. My hope was that they would be more receptive to our target population. I know in the past we've made some efforts to outreach to them and get them involved, especially for those transitional youth. They have tremendous resources for the entire system, but especially for those transitional youth. So I guess my question to you is, could you help us advocate and get them to the table for these youth?
I'll do that.
You're awesome, sir.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Parkinson? Well, I certainly think that's a rather comprehensive list of some of the things that have been going on in the juvenile justice arena over the last several years. And again, I really want to commend Mr. Parkinson and extend my thanks to you for leading this effort to kind of memorialize that and kind of give us a report card on where we are and some suggestions on where we can go.
I'm absolutely, it was a pleasure to do this, but I want to just remind the group that it wasn't just me. Lieutenant Royka, Corporal Brown, Yvette Boatwright, Judy Royston, Rocky Brancato were all instrumental. There was some good give and take during this process, but as I've indicated, there's a lot on this wish list, and those of us that have engaged in long-term research, we know that this is a very expensive proposition. So in my initial discussions with Dr. Dembo, the price tag that I was given was about 15 times the cost of his civil citation review, which we also paid for. So we might have to look at chunking this up into smaller, more palatable bites from a budget perspective. I think there's also, a lot of this data is readily available. The DJJ provides us on a regular basis, or anyone with a basic understanding of the JJIS can go and pull, at least for the last 5 years.
Right.
So a lot of this can be stratified, so I might look at how maybe some of our stakeholders here can help with it and kind of offset the costs.
Excellent.
Overall, this group has done a tremendous amount of work over the last 10 years, and I think it's important that we recognize that, but also identify some of the areas that we still need to work on.
Totally agree. Thank you. And thanks to everybody that participated in that process as well. Okay, so we'll move on. I've got hopefully a brief presentation on the final report that we completed, our ad hoc committee completed on the dually involved youth. And as you all remember, a little over 6 months ago, I received a letter from Secretary Mars Stiller asking that we assist the department in conducting a review on the system of care for children who are dually involved in both the dependency and the delinquency systems. And so March 15th, we formed a ad hoc committee, and that ad hoc committee conducted a series of meetings over the last 6 months and worked very diligently and deliberately to have an open-minded discussion about the current system of care and make some recommendations on some things that we felt could be helpful for the departments to consider in better serving that population of children. So, basically and this is kind of a summary of the overall thing, but what we found is that 77% of the children who are committed to a Department of Juvenile Justice residential program from Hillsborough County are the dually involved population. And so in fiscal year 16-17, 166 children were committed to DJJ residential. Only 39 had no DCF involvement. So we also know from Florida Tax Watch that foster youth are 10 times more likely to enter the juvenile justice system, and 25% of foster children will be incarcerated within 2 years of aging out of that system. Essentially, this population of children fall more rapidly into the deeper end of both systems, the delinquency and dependency system. And we also found that for this particular very small population of children, the systems aren't designed very well to deal with their unique needs and their level of care that's required. And what we're talking about in Hillsborough County is 80 to 100 children at any given time who are in a pre-adjudication status within the delinquency system are dually involved. And there's consistently about 20 children that fall in that category that face incredible instability in terms of having a permanent place to rest their head at night. So this is kind of a pie chart, which is a visual illustration of the DJJ residential commitments. The red area is 23%. That represents the children that are not involved in the dependency system that are committed to a juvenile justice residential program from Hillsborough County. The rest of the pie, all of those children have some involvement in the dependency system. So the challenges that we identified is really, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand this, the systems do a great job. Dependency and delinquency do a fantastic job with almost all of the children. Almost 100% of the children, the systems deal with appropriately, efficiently, and have programming that meets their needs. For this population of children, the systems just simply aren't designed to meet the needs of this population of children. We found that it would be helpful to add additional assistance with systems navigation. Quite often, the caregivers and the children are torn between the two systems, and you've got the dependency safety plan, and you've got the delinquency probation plan, and they don't know where to begin or how to go about completing either one. And so some assistance with helping them navigate that system. And quite frankly, having an individual person that serves as a navigator but also as an advocate for them could be very helpful. So this small population of children really require a greater systematic level of coordinated care. Additional challenges are that this population of children have horrific trauma experiences. Basically, we believe that every time their placement is changed, that it creates a new traumatic experience. Every time the child is arrested, it's another traumatic experience. Their trauma is complex and it's deep, and the systems simply are not designed to address that level of care in any coordinated way. Now, there are programs where those issues can be addressed individually, but for this population of children, it's persistently inadequate to meet their needs as a whole. Substance exposure during gestation. A lot of the children that fall in this category were born substance exposed, which you add that on top of the complex trauma, and that creates additional issues with really addressing the needs of the child. Many of these children are within the pre-adjudication status in the delinquency system, so the delinquency system basically cannot order the child into anything because they're still presumed not guilty of the offenses that they have committed, or they're on probation and under community supervision, but refusing to go to placement or not complying with the welfare system is not a violation of the terms of their community supervision, right? So the courts have very little leeway in terms of authority to engage this child in any specific type of treatment modality. And DCF basically has no ability to do that whatsoever under the current law. So again, the causes that we found, and this is just a few, is the years of failed placements, the high turnovers with case managers, failed efforts at reunification, high rates of arrest, and persistent instability in both the institutional and home settings are just examples of the complex trauma that these children experience on a daily basis. And we found that trauma really manifests itself as maladaptive behaviors. So while the child appears to be defiant or, can't come to trust anybody, it's not because they're being difficult or they're choosing to be that way. This is a result of really the unique and traumatic experiences that the child has experienced throughout their lifetime. So some of the things that we talked about as a committee when we were coming up with these suggestions was that we need to really respond to this population of children to address their needs and also their gifts and attributes. So many of these children are very resilient. And so if we're going to design a system of care, we should probably take that into account, right? Because they have an incredible amount of resiliency, but they also have complex trauma and other things that need to be addressed at the same time. So we can really work to increase their gifts and also treat their other underlying issues. So we are recommending trauma-informed approach. And when we talk about that, we're not just using trauma-informed as a cliche term. Mm-hmm. We're talking expert level with continued competency exams. And we really believe that the children should be treated in such a way that respects their dignity and increases their sense of security and helps them grow capacity for trust. And also, if any of this moves forward, we feel strongly that the children should be involved in helping us decide what that looks like, right? Because they're the ones that know what is beneficial and what they respond to. And so we need to be mindful of that as well. So we made 6 recommendations. The most controversial one, obviously, is the legislative amendment to Chapter 39. Mm-hmm. We went back and forth on this, and it was very lively discussions that we had regarding this. We initially were suggesting a change to Chapter 984, which is the Sins-Fin statute, which already grants the court authority to place children within a series of settings, but the child can't have a pending delinquency or dependency case, so it excludes this entire population. So we found that suggesting amendments to that section of the Sins-Fin statute would probably be very problematic since it governs most of the department's prevention efforts. And instead, we're recommending that the departments consider legislation to Chapter 39, which would basically be the exact same Sins-Fins type of approach, but in Chapter 39. And I think it's important to note here that we expect most of the children within this system, if we design a system where they can have a stable kind of environment, that most of the children are going to engage voluntarily. Personally, I anticipate it would be a very small number of children, who would ever rise to the point where a dependent child in need of services petition would actually be filed against them. Now, if that were to happen, and it would likely happen in some cases, there would be an entire court process for that. The judge would ultimately make the determination whether that child needed to be, for their safety and well-being, needed to be ordered into care. They would be represented by attorneys, and essentially the judge, at the end of the day, would have to place that child in the least restrictive environment possible, meaning the child would start off automatically in a non-secure facility. And only if things escalated over time and it was brought back to court, the judge could then consider increasing that to a staff secure or a secure facility. Again, I honestly, personally believe that a very small number of children would fall into that category. However, we are mindful, and we state in the report, that we understand state law that grants this new authority to the courts and the department could be applied unevenly throughout the state. So we are recommending that the secretaries take that into account and work very deliberately with the legislature on developing, like defining normalcy activities and standards of care and that type of thing along the way as they go through this. Our second recommendation is data collection and analysis and enhanced prevention efforts. So again, as Mr. Parkinson pointed out, the data is kind of all over the place, and we feel that if the departments do a better job of actually identifying a central way to collect this data and analyze it, that we can start identifying some predictive factors way earlier on, right? Some commonalities between this population and failure points far before they end up being duly involved. Also, the CBHA, the Comprehensive Behavioral Health Assessments, we found that those are done kind of sporadically when the child enters the system, and then they're kind of done as needed. But we're recommending that DCF require that any contract provider update that on an annual basis, and we use that information to kind of have it as a source to analyze it. We're recommending that the DJJ red flag staffing kind of intervention be incorporated in the dependency system for any placement disruption. So a 6-year-old who has a placement change, there should be the same model we're recommending would be helpful for everybody to dig in at that point, that first time, and start doing it in every subsequent time that a placement change is made. We're also recommending, on the prevention side, more engagement. DJJ does a great job with their prevention programming, Prodigy, AMI Kids, PACE. They've got an array of services, and we feel that similar approach for dependent children would be a helpful thing as well. And a community feedback form, which is just a simple form that we ask. We're suggesting that people that interact with dependent children should fill this form out on a weekly basis and submit it monthly to the case manager so that they can see any kind of things that are popping up along the way in behaviors or kind of traumatic events that we might be able to wrap more services around that child in a preventative measure as opposed to waiting until things blow up and the child gets, I can't have him here anymore. And well, this has been going on for 8 months, but nobody took the time to kind of figure that out ahead of time. So, and our training recommendation is really in trauma-informed training, and we're not, again, using this as a cliche. We're talking like deep level, everybody that works with this population of children, because we're proposing basically a different system of care for this population. They be deeply trained in trauma-informed care, motivational interviewing, and we also feel that the department's protective action response, their PAR intervention, would be an important piece of that as well. Now, DJJ is revamping PAR, and it's being moved to a model called the youth engagement model, which has a lot more focus on verbal de-escalation techniques and that type of thing, and we feel that that would be helpful for this system of care and for the workers, the folks that work with this population of children. They should be trained and have a standard of responding to the child's events. So our model of care is basically an entry point. We're recommending there by the JARF and the Juvenile Assessment Center, creating a non-secure area where any child that they don't have a place to sleep that night, instead of sleeping in an office, they can be taken to this location and have a safe place for them to stay and start engaging them in that process of increasing their trust and security and treating them with dignity. This would be specifically designed for that population. We would have trained professionals there that would assess the child's needs. And it's important to note here that these children have been assessed their whole life. And so what we need to do, instead of sitting them down and asking them questions and nodding our heads, is we need to take advantage of all the information that's already been gathered in various locations. And we need one trained professional that's going to do a comprehensive assessment of that child, but with the existing information that's already there. And then figure out what their plan looks like from that point. But we already know a lot about these children. We don't need to be asking them 100 more questions, the same ones they've been answering their whole life. At that point, a therapeutic mentor and a individual navigator therapist would be assigned to the child, and those are going to be folks that are going to follow them throughout this entire system. Then we are recommending a step-up, step-down system. This is basically like a 15-bed fluid kind of thing that's based on age, acuity, behavior, gender, risk, their needs, their level of trauma, and that type of thing. So these 15 beds need to be fluid, right? It can't be like, I've got 4 girls' beds and 5 boys' beds. It's got to be an ever-evolving system because you don't know what that population is going to look like at any given time. And then we're recommending 5 secure beds. Again, this is for the children who have the most acute needs or that progress if the legislative intervention were to be passed by the legislature, that progress through that system of care. And it, again, would be a short-term kind of respite approach that's therapeutic in nature, that treats the child for their needs. And then the idea is to step them down through that and find a professional foster parent that is that can work with this child. And so we're recommending the departments go forward with recruitment of non-traditional foster parents, and then they incorporate the Presley Ridge treatment foster care model of training for that group of foster parents. And so you'll see some of the curriculum there that is designed specifically for foster parents that work with this population, this type of population of children. And lastly, we're recommending that we work as a community and that the departments work to increase the circles of support for this population of children. So simple things like, instead of calling case managers, maybe we call them care managers. And that could have a systematic change on the way that our approach is towards this population of children. We could work, better with teachers and the educational system. The therapist navigators will follow these children through the system. They'll be advocates, but also providing individual therapy. And they'll follow them throughout the system. Their frequency of contact and their interaction with the child will decrease over time. And once they're hopefully in a professional foster parent setting, that frequency will be not needed as much, but they'll still be available and supportive of the child. The therapeutic mentors is another thing that we're recommending for this population, and that's simply somebody that's like, look, we're going to do homework on Tuesday and Thursday. I'm going to be there every Tuesday and Thursday. You can bet on it. I promise it. They'll show up every Tuesday and Thursday, and on Saturday we're going to go fishing. And, have you ever been fishing? Some of these children have never been fishing, so somebody just to follow through and do what they say they're going to do, so that child doesn't feel let down anymore. And we're recommending assistant crossover public defenders who would represent the child in the delinquency and the dependency system. And they would represent the express interests of the child. So this is kind of just a brief diagram of what that system of care looks like. And then this is a pretty fantastic illustration of what we're talking about with the increasing the circles of support for that child. So you'll see that the care managers, the JPOs, and the CPIs are on the outer circle. And then the intent here and the idea here is to increase that inner circle with community members, faith-based organizations, therapeutic mentors, navigators, therapists, and really wrap that child around with some intensive services. of people who are going to do what they say they're going to do, and that child can learn to trust them and believe that what they say is true, and help them engage in activities like culinary arts or Prodigy, or find a job that they love. And if we can do that, we feel strongly that that we can make a difference with this population of children. So that is a summary of our report. And I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'd be happy to answer them.
I do have just two things. The first is Officer Bacon and I are glad that we took nuclear reactor training on that last slide, because we get it. We knew it would come in handy one day, right? The other thing is, I heard clearly that you said that legislative amendment there might not be an appetite for that. Has there been, or what kind of discussions have happened about piloting this in one circuit to gain a little bit of momentum? And when I say that, all of those 6 recommendations, how much discussion came from that? Or was there? Talk about that.
Well, where we are right now, and I apologize, I should have addressed this at the beginning, is so we submitted the recommendation. We formed the committee March 15th. On August 20th, we submitted our report to the secretaries. My last conversation with Secretary Marsteller was that she's basically not going to tell me how she feels about anything until she meets with Secretary Popple. So the two of them, it's my understanding, are scheduled to meet later this month. And so, basically, I don't know that you could pilot the legislative piece because there's no legal authority to do that right now. But we, as a committee, we have agreed to continue meeting because we've got some really dedicated, talented people around the table, right, to talk about this issue. And so the intention of our continued engagement is to look as a community, really, to see what we could do if none of this ever happens, right? If the secretaries tell us, hey, thanks a lot, but we're not interested, or we think you all are crazy, then as a community, what can we do to help serve this population better? And so, is that looking at maybe creating the training module, recommendation number 3, the trauma-informed care piece, and, maybe asking the folks that work with this population to embrace that model and help us along with that. So I think that we're going to continue discussing it, and hopefully we'll be able to work as a community to see what we can do absent any other kind of higher level changes.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. Absence of the things that we can't control. What I hear, number one, is first there's a need. The other thing that is very clear is that it's going to take a lot. And we got to be deliberate in how we strategically plan for it. And so if there was one circuit, any circuit, certainly that has a commitment, certainly I believe ours is, but when we talk to the school and all the different community players, faith-based and all of the providers and all of that, if we could pilot it to some degree, and it's still going to cost time, resources, and a deliberate effort, but if we could pilot it, it still might not convince the secretary to do, to move on it. But I think every day that goes by, this particular population is not being served as best as we could. So a pilot sometimes might be the easier thing to say, let's just swipe everything, right? That's what I was just hoping we could do. But thank you for that. A lot of good work.
Mr. Parkinson?
Couple things to add. I think there is legal precedence for a pilot. I think back to the initial legislation for community-based care in '96. It was actually originally rolled out as a pilot of 4 or 5 areas. And then in '98, legislation was pushed through to mandate it across the state eventually. So there's certainly provisions for that. Nice. Whether or not there's the appetite, right, I don't know. I want to thank the Ad-Hoc committee. I know it was not an easy job, and I know that originally it was supposed to be an Ad-Hoc committee, so it was time limited, and it kind of evolved and morphed into something different. As this letter came from the secretary, and Chris Card came here and made a sell to us, Some of the things that I had in the back of my mind were the recent DCF reports, the peer review of the community-based care system here, the OIG's report from 2018 on the system here, the turnover in the CBC that you mentioned. It's significant, but put a number on it. It's actually 100% turnover for our CML organization, case managers. So there's really no continuity in care. And I had 2 teenagers that are now adults now, and you always wonder as a parent, do you know your child? So if a CMO organization is turning over every 2 months, 3 months, there's really not an opportunity for that case manager to really get to know that kid. So that's a disservice to the youth. So I think those issues really need to be addressed in spades, because all the issues that we're having with these cross-system youth, they're having in the CBC system. It's just magnified because our youth have 2 issues going on. The analysis that went on in the report, the Ad-Hoc report, is very, very impressive, very comprehensive. I was very impressed with some of the discussion, and some of the discussion actually talked about both sides of the argument, which was wonderful. A lot of people were there, and I know because this was a 6-month process, not everybody was able to be at all the meetings all the time. So, I think that maybe had an impact on the final result as well. In terms of some of the recommendations, some of them are perfectly in tune with best practices and the DJJ roadmap and the Blue Ribbon Commission's recommendations. Some of them are not. There's some things that are being done as best practices across the country, because we're not the only community dealing with this issue. There's some things that are being done across the country that were not considered, and I would like the group to at least consider them in the future. And not to bore you, but I'm going to pass around a handout. This is actually from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, from their Criminal Justice Reform Crossover Youth Model Development. And as I read through this, and as you look at it, think about some of these things. Some of them we're doing. Some of them we're talking about doing. Some of them we haven't considered doing. And these are emerging best practices for dealing with dual system youth. Early identification of dual involvement. We talked about the data sharing. Improved information sharing between DJJ and child welfare. Use of coordinated case supervision across JJ and child welfare. I mean, that is brilliant, because that's one of the major issues we're having, is the dissonance between the 2 systems. What if we had one individual responsible for that kid, whether they're in either system or both? Increase youth engagement and decision-making. That's a big issue. A lot of these kids are on the precipice of adulthood, and they've been acting as an adult for many, many years, in many cases more so than their parents. So I think it's very important to consider their decision-making in the process. Reduce the use of pre-adjudication detention, which we have done a lot of work on that in recent years. Increase family engagement and decision-making. Improve coordination with the mental health system. Again, we talked about some of that. Improved coordination with education. Reduced use of out-of-home placement. Use of pre-court coordination. Reduce the use of congregate care. Use of joint assessment process, which we talked about. Use of an integrated case plan. How awesome would that be if the case managers for both systems were able to use the same plan across the system of care? And throw into that, what about the mental health system and the substance abuse system? Use of one judge, one family. Obviously, we've made some progress on that. Use of integrated case plan, again. Reduced arrests and referrals from placement. We've ebbed and flowed on that. We've had some issues in the past, especially from some of our congregate care facilities. Info sharing with law enforcement. Use of specialized units. When I think of specialized units, I think of some of the innovative things they've done on the adult system, like assertive community treatment teams for the most severe and persistently mentally ill people. Little teams that follow individuals in the community that are wrapping around with services, with a psychiatrist and a social worker, employment specialists, nurses. Use of dedicated dockets, which we've done to a degree here. Use of continuity of counsel. And I think that's where the PD's recommendation certainly comes in handy here. Increased use of independent living services. honestly, in some of these situations where those youth have been acting as adult for many years, maybe we need to do a better job of helping them transition to adulthood and letting them be more independent, and then use of permanency packs. And these are not my recommendations. These are OJJDP and some of the things that are occurring across the country that have proven really successful or emerging as best practices. I think as a group we need to certainly keep in consideration. For the child welfare system, obviously in the media it was reported that the current case management organization is no longer going to be doing those services in about 70, 80 days. So I think that's going to be a challenge for us all, not just us, but also the CBC world. I think we need to look at how we make sure that transition goes very smoothly for whoever's going to be doing that service in the future. I think as a group, we need to reach out to some of the stakeholders that are members of this group but don't regularly attend, like DCF. I think getting them back here, getting them back to the table, because they're keenly in tune with what's going on in the child welfare system. And that's one of the reasons they're on this group. But I don't think, there's been a lot of transition and change over at DCF. We need to make sure that they're here and part of the decision-making process. I think we're going to have a bumpy road ahead during the CMO transition, so as a group, we just need to kind of consolidate and circle around the CBC system and make sure that they're aware that we're here, we have resources, and you can't just continue to do the status quo because it's not working.
I'd just like to share this. I do agree with everyone that there is some progress that needs to be made on all fronts to ensure that this is an effective measure that is put into place. But I will say this is a complex issue, and I want to echo what Rob said about your efforts, Elvin, and the group's efforts. Definitely comprehensive, definitely an exhaustive look at these duly served youth. So just commending you guys on the work that you've done thus far, because it's going to take a comprehensive effort to effectively serve these youth.
And Elvin, now that the ad hoc committee is not going to be an ad hoc committee, I think it would be helpful to have a meeting summary from those meetings that you can report back to this group at their monthly and then executive meetings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you concur that would be helpful in making sure there was continuity and communication across the group?
So last board meeting, we agreed to make this one of our priorities as a board, so we'll add it to the board priority section of the agenda, and we'll provide some information in the minutes of the meeting for everybody's dissemination.
Thank you.
And so just real quick, lastly, I just want to thank all the members of the ad hoc committee that participated in this process. I can tell you, trying to lead a group of people with various kind of opinions and approaches was challenging, to say the least. But the level of transparency and the level of commitment to really rolling up their sleeves and trying to figure out a better way to provide services to this population of children is beyond commendable. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate everybody that participated in this process. And, we always didn't agree on everything, but as a group, we agreed at the very beginning that we would not recommend anything or move forward or suggest anything that we didn't collectively have a general consensus for. And so while it got a little difficult at times, we never got to the point where anybody walked away because they were mad or they were angry, and we did what we felt the group conscience guided us to do. And so it's really been an incredible experience, and the folks that helped us put this together, they're all really deserve a huge pat on the back for their participation and for their advocacy for this population of children. So thank you. Okay, we'll move on to member updates. So we'll start with DJJ and Ms. Hammersley.
Yes. Okay, our updates that we currently have within Circuit 13 probation, we are in the process of hiring 2 senior probation officers, and we also are in the process of hiring for 3 JPO vacancies. Another item that we're working through is supervised release. Our new provider, Bays, will be coming on board in October. The specific date and time in October has not been established at this point because they have to do the hiring, the background screening, the training, but we look forward to sharing that opportunity of supervision with Bays when they come on board. Another item is recent public awareness campaign that the Secretary of the Department has initiated. It's the School Threats Awareness Campaign. It's labeled as It's No Joke. It's an opportunity for parents, youth, any member of the public to be aware of, as I'm going to read off of the media release, to dissuade youth from making school threats because doing so can lead to being arrested and charged with a felony. Youth and parents, teachers are encouraged to report any and all threats they see or hear. And they can notify law enforcement of a threat or can report a threat anonymously through Florida's Fortify FL app, a suspicious activity reporting tool that allows you to instantly relay information to appropriate law enforcement agencies and school officials. Likewise, there is also a hashtag It's No Joke campaign that you can link through Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as well. So just public awareness campaign to minimize children from making fraudulent threats that result in arrest and can impede them later on throughout their juvenile history and may go into adult as well. And I'm going to go ahead with our current probation and detention numbers. Currently, we have 57 youth in our secure detention facility. We have 47 youth that are out on supervised released home detention status. We have 6 youth that are currently committed pre-placement pending a bed availability. And we have 456 youth that are on some type of supervision, meaning probation or post-commitment probation or community release, conditional release. And we have 1 youth that's on probation day treatment. We have a new provider. It's JASIS. It stands for Juvenile Community Intervention Services, and that new provider is Eckerd. The provider itself the program is called Pathways, and they recently started taking referrals. So we have 1 youth that has been admitted into that. So every week we try to get 4 more referrals, and Pathways are doing the screening process to get youth involved with this opportunity for day treatment. Questions? Yes, sir.
In your Pathway program, what's the number of youth that's scheduled to be in that particular program?
I believe the capacity will be at 16 to 18. I can't remember off the top of my head the capacity.
Okay. Is that similar to day treatment, or would that not include day treatment, but maybe with some educational component?
Right. It's community-based, so it's not, the children are not going to a brick-and-mortar facility
Right.
as they previously were. They're working through Gary Adult, and one of their focuses is on educational.
Right.
Okay, so they are not providing the education, they're referring them to the school system
Right.
to attain that.
How often are the kids actually meeting once they get placed in the Pathway program?
Oh, they're meeting, it's every day, well, excuse me, not every day, but 5 days a week. So they're seeing a case manager coming to them and getting involved with them. Also, they have weekend activities as well that they're planning for the kids. Mhm.
Okay. And this, what period of time that I don't know specifically that DJJ will have the kids in a particular Pathway program?
Well, the length of stay is anticipated at 180 days.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The program will also accept youth that are committed to a minimum risk commitment, which places them within the community, and Pathways can accept those children too. Their length of stay may go longer as determined, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I did have one question. The supervised release funding, what's the capacity for that?
I do not have the answer to that, Rob. I do not have the answer to
I'm
that.
just curious. Obviously, with the revised DRE, we have a lot more flexibility than we once had.
Right.
And obviously, we don't have even reporting centers to the degree that we need them.
Yes.
Supervised release is another. I'm just wondering what kind of capacity are we?
Well, I know the contract has not been signed by all parties at this point. I think it's still being formalized. But as far as the actual financial funding, I do not have that number at this time.
Okay.
And I can actually answer that. So we've hired a director for the overall program. We're going to be doing it in the central and south regions of Florida. And then we'll have a regional coordinator stationed out of Tampa, and I believe we have 4 community supervision specialists that are going to be assigned to Circuit 13 alone. So the frequency of contact and the hours and that type of thing are really all determined by the continuum of care that the department has put out. But we'll be making contact with each child that's on any type of home detention status. Since we don't have an ERC, the child will be, basically, if they would qualify for ERC, they'll be under intensive home detention in lieu of an ERC. So they'll be checked on and met with based on the level of care that's required by that.
And what do you think the mean frequency is going to be for those home visits?
Well, home detention, I believe, is once a week. Intensive home detention is 3 times a week with one
So
contact.
you'll be doing that service in lieu of
Yes.
teaching?
Correct.
Yeah, we'll be at every detention hearing. The children that are ordered to intensive home detention with electronic monitoring, we'll be placing the monitor on them and monitoring those alerts and responding to them accordingly.
And what role will the JPO play, if any, for those cases?
Well, dialogue, constant communication. So, for example, if a child is in a violation stage, the supervised release tracker will be notifying the department, the JPO, to where they can address it with the court.
So they'll actually be acting in your stead?
Yes.
As far as the supervision contacts, but other information pertaining to case management, that stays with the assigned juvenile probation officer. They take the ownership of that.
And there'll be weekly, in every circuit, there'll be weekly detention review committees. So we'll be, as an organization and working with the department, we'll be reviewing every single case, every child that's on home detention status, and reviewing their progress and that type of thing, and basically staffing every case each week.
Yes, currently we have had that process ongoing for the last several years. So in Circuit 13, ours is on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. So all members of our supervised release review team are on that. And we've also shared that information and some of our protocols, internal protocols that we have in Circuit 13 with BASE, so they could start formulating, see what we do, and create their own and work off of what we've started. Yeah.
So redirect Elvin. So you've identified that you're going to have 4 staff assigned to Circuit 13. What do you imagine would be their ideal caseload?
It's all dictated by the continuum. So I think intensive with home detention with monitoring, I think the maximum caseload is like 12 per case manager. I think I'm not the operations guy that's implementing it, so I don't want to misspeak. But it's really all dictated by the continuum.
And I can say that we have 4 full-time JPOs that do that, and their caseload is anywhere from, like, it could be 14, 18, what have you. Sometimes we may need added reinforcements making the contacts if one of those folks are on leave. So we manage to get it done. We call in assistance from our JPO team. That's we're a team, and that's what we do. But they are able to effectively maintain that because you may have one child just that one time a week that you need to see, and that other child that you're going to have to see once a week, and one of those, and then, again, one curfew during that week, and if it's intensive, at least 2 weekend contacts. And we rotate the weekend contacts so somebody's not working every single weekend.
So figure average caseload of 15 times 4, you got 60.
60.
So does that mean increased capacity for that level of service because you guys are doing it now, or is it just the same 60 that you've already been serving?
Look, I mean, you know, we did the best, the department did the best they could to predict the numbers of children that would fall in each category, but it's not, I mean, if it exceeds that.
What I mean by you handling those 60 youth now, does that free up your staff to handle more kids or
Yes,
more
to-
meaningful engagement?
Yes, exactly. That is exactly what it does do, to have them provide, you know, effective case management. And we have other venues that require different levels of supervision as well. What we do know is that once base comes on and we're ongoing, we'll see how those contacts are working, and if they're experiencing any difficulties of contacts, then of course we've been advised to bring that to our headquarters to where there can be more discussion about the contract and the funding and those type of issues. And that was from a call that we had just yesterday.
Very nice, thank you.
And the department's been great. I just want to say that on the record. Throughout the Central and South region, all the assistant chief probation officers and the chief probation officers have been outstanding working with us because they're already doing this, and so they've been really helpful in sharing information and helping us secure office space and that type of thing. So the partnership is fantastic, and I really appreciate it on behalf of Bays. Any other questions? Ms. McGee, would you like to provide any information regarding prevention?
The only thing that I would just like to remind everyone is that we do have an upcoming conference coming up, which is Restoring Hope, which is October the 29th and the 30th. It is in Orlando at the Florida Hotel and Center. So if you have not registered, please go on to our Eventbrite link and register, because we can definitely look for more and more people to come. And also for any providers that are here, that I do have a PAT training that is scheduled for November. It is on Skill Pro. So if they would like to go on Skill Pro and register, they can do that as well.
That's great. Okay, not to put you on the spot, but we have JDAI as one of our updates, and I know you're brand new, so don't feel obligated, but if you want to introduce yourself, that would be fantastic.
I'm Natalie Steiner. I'm the new JDAI coordinator for Circuit 13. I started on August 30th, so I'm just getting the lay of the land still. If anyone wants to reach out to me to discuss what you were working on with the former coordinator, if we want to have a one-on-one meeting, please feel free to reach out. But as far as updates go, don't have much for 2 weeks in. So
Awesome. Well, welcome aboard.
Thank
We're
you.
glad
Thank you.
that you're here, and we look forward to working with you. Ms. Boatwright, how about civil citations?
Okay, I've passed out some stats. They should be in front of you. I have extra copies if you don't have them. But for the month of August, we received 30 civil citation referrals. 21 were community referrals and 9 were from the school. Of those 30, 28 remain open. 1 referral was closed out because the child was ineligible. 1 was referred for higher supervision. In terms of law enforcement agencies, Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office sent 13 civil citations to our program, and the Tampa Police Department collectively sent 8. There were no referrals from the Plant City Police Department and no referrals from Temple Terrace Police Department. As far as offenses are concerned, we had 16 petty theft offenses. We did have an opportunity to serve 2 youth that had battery, domestic violence charges. We had 1 assault, 1 child with assault. There were 2 possession of marijuana offenses, and we've got a varied amount of victims. We had individuals, 7. There were 2 amusement park victims, department store, 6, discount stores, 4. In terms of race and ethnicity, we're pretty equal. 11 African-American youth were charged in the community. A total of 13 African-American youth were charged with civil citations and 17 Caucasian youth. I wanted to point out in terms of the age of young people that received civil citations, we did have one 11-year-old. we had 2 13-year-olds, 2 14-year-old youth, 4 15-year-old youth, 5 kids were 16 years of age, and we had 7 17-year-olds in the community that received civil citations. For the month of August, we had 3 youth that were from out of county, and I'm looking at the final column with zip codes and schools. And then we had a number of youth throughout the county that received civil citations in the various zip code areas. I think other than the schools where the children attended, Adams, we had 1 child from Adams Middle School, 1 child from Armwood, 1 child from Beth Shields, 1 referral from Hillsborough High School, 1 from King High School, 1 from Plant City, and 1 from Simmons Career Center. Tomlin Middle, we had 1 referral as well. And so these stats are posted at www.fljud13.org. Are there any questions about civil citations served by the Juvenile Diversion Program for the month of August?
I just had one comment. The numbers seem to be holding pretty steady despite the fact that we've increased eligibility. How is the workload for your staff?
You're right, Mr. Parkinson, in terms of the numbers. In comparison to the month of July, we've only received 3 additional referrals for this month. The caseloads are manageable, thanks in part because we've been able to hire 2 additional staff members. I think at the last JJ board meeting, we reported that we were down with case managers, but we have filled those 2 positions. And so those 2 individuals should be out of training after today and ready to receive some cases. So there's been relief.
And Ms. Boatwright, did you want to give an update on some of the efforts that you've been making to enhance the interventions within civil citation?
Yes, we've been in continual communication with Lions Quest International, and those of you all that attended the executive JJ board meeting, I believe in June of this year, had an opportunity to witness Ms. Kimberly Hayes in her presentation on social and emotional learning. The Lions Quest, they do have a program that they have brought to the state of Florida, and we've been in talks with them. They would like to set up an additional planning meeting. We don't have the exact date, but tentatively it may be at the end of October. And what she would like to do is give those that had not had the opportunity to hear the presentation, hear it, and those that had the opportunity to hear the presentation, to hear it again. And you can expect, many of you can expect to get an invite via email to attend, because I think that the Lions Club, as well as us with the Juvenile Diversion Program, recognize that you all that have been working with young people in our circuit are the experts. So we want to make sure that you all are at the table.
And for those that weren't able to see the presentation at the last executive committee meeting, the Lions Quest curriculum is social and emotional learning. It's an evidence-based practice. It's gone through the NREP back when SAMHSA had an NREP, so it is empirically validated. The awesome thing about it is the SEL curriculum really does get at the heart of a lot of those criminogenic risk factors and prevention risk factors that we deal with every day. They're able to tailor the curriculum to the individual unique needs of either a school or a community or even down to the program level. So the vision would be that our civil citation providers, they provide the gamut of services, everything from deep-end substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment to opportunities provision. And with that varying degree, there's not a consistent intervention while going through the program. It's based on individual need. But if we could get some of these providers to assimilate this evidence-based practice, tailor it to their own individual unique needs, it'll improve outcomes in the long run because it is an EBP. And I think about evening reporting centers. I think about Safe and Sound, some of the programs that are doing really wonderful work there. If we augment their capability with an evidence-based practice, I think we'll get a lot more mileage with our resources. So if you folks are interested, please, once Yvette sends the invite out or our office sends the invite out, come learn about it. They're going to give an overview again, but they're also going to go through one of the curriculum modules so you can, kind of a day in the life of it. And again, it's important to note that the curriculum could be tailored to the individual needs of your agency. And the best part about it is that Yvette has been able to advocate vigorously with some of the local stakeholders, and as is our office, and we actually have a Lions Club, local Lions Club that wants to support the effort. So they're going to provide the resources and funding to bring this trainer down and train everybody on the EBP.
Excellent. Any additional comments or questions? Thank you, Ms. Boatwright. That was a very comprehensive report, and we appreciate you sharing that information with us.
Thank you.
So let's move on to Mr. Menzie. It looks like you got the short straw and can provide some information on SINS-FINS.
Yes, I can. Not a whole lot to report. We currently have beds available in our residential program. Really just working on keeping the youth engaged. I know someone earlier mentioned Prodigy, and starting in October, Prodigy will be coming out to do weekly groups with the youth on our campus twice a week. So we're excited about that, and just another way to keep the youth engaged and keep them bought into the programming. Other than that, we are also hosting our Volunteer Appreciation Banquet, which will be October 19th, so next month, from 5 to 7 p.m. So, we're just excited to be pushing forward and, working with DJJ and getting youth in as we receive the referrals, screening the youth, working with the families and just meeting them where they're at. That's about it right now.
Excellent. Any comments or questions?
I just had one, just a request to, particularly to SINS-FINS. We were at a meeting, committee meeting at one of the other partners with Safe and Sound, the Family Health and Wellbeing Committee. And we'd just like to ask maybe to come and share with us a little bit. There were questions about Baker Acts and youth that may need some respite, right? Whether they're coming from the school district, the calls, or things like that. So just as a show of good faith, if you could maybe come to the next meeting, I think it's October 8th, and just share with us. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Good morning. Yes, we are slated to be there on October the 8th.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Well, apparently somebody double tapped because they gave me homework and made sure I told them I would ask you here. So thank you for that.
They obviously didn't believe you were going to do that. So.
And rightly so. No, I'm kidding. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Mr. Menzie. Okay, well, the one time I left Safe and Sound off of the agenda under member updates, we have Ms. Amicia here. So would you like to provide an update?
Yes, thank you. We have a couple of updates that we wanted to make. First, we are one of 3 agencies that are partnering with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for their social justice initiative. And I'll pass this around. This is a booklet that they've recently printed this week that talks about the initiative and what the 3 agencies are doing with them. One of the key initiatives that we're doing is the Second Chances Matter at the Juvenile Detention Center that Ms. Romberg mentioned earlier. In addition to having several activities that we will be doing with the youth, there'll be some mentoring sessions with the Bucks players, with our Leadership Council for Safe and Sound Hillsborough, and also with the Detention Center Advisory Board members. The space is limited, so we had to limit the amount of people that would attend outside of the Buccaneers and the actual youth in the detention center. And one of our additional focuses will be on why they're there and what the plans are for them to not return. Another initiative that is specific to Safe and Sound Hillsborough is our youth mock trials. We are actually going to do a youth mock trial with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, several of their players, in Farnell Middle School. That will be taking place. The actual mock trial will take place October 28th. But we will have some sessions, some practice sessions with the State Attorney's Office and the Public Defender's Office, University of South Florida, with the students prior to prep them for the mock trial. We'll also have about 30 students participating. An organization called Team Enough will be present with 5 students that work to address gun violence prevention throughout the various schools. And usually our mock trials uses a real-life case that deals with gun violence. Dr. Kathleen Heidi at the University of South Florida will actually be bringing, she has a class that day. She's the chair of our Criminal Justice Committee, and she will be bringing her students to the mock trial. There'll be about 10 undergraduate students and 15 graduate students that will be working on data. We do a couple of surveys with the youth that participate. They'll be working on the data for that. And as Ms. Romberg mentioned, we'll have ESPN and Tampa Bay Times to cover the event. Additionally, we're still currently working with providing programming through our community partners in East Tampa, University area, Plant City, and South County, and we'll also begin doing some programming in Town and Country that we're working on, one of which we just implemented a Yoga in the Park program that we'll be doing at Sandy Perone Park and also at Kings Forest Park, in addition to some other programming that we're working on. In the summer, June and July, we had a My Brother's Keeper initiative where we did a camp that was a credit recovery camp, and I just have a little bit of data on that. We partnered with Blake High School and worked with some of their boys at Blake High School that needed to go through the credit recovery program. We enrolled about 18 students. Only 10 completed the program with about a 56% completion rate. The total credits that were deficient of the 18 students was 44, and attained credits from the recovery program was about 21.5. And the total investment per student was $1,388.89. Mr. Barton is working in partnership with Judge Twine Thomas for a boys summit that will happen in October of 2019. It'll be a half-day activity summit. They'll have workshops. They'll also do pairing of youth mentorship agencies. So they're working with several mentorship agencies to pair some of the boys with. And they're also going to be working with the schools to help with any credit recovery that is needed for those boys. Mr. Barton's also working with the Criminal Justice Committee of the NAACP to put together a Law Day event. The focus of that event will be to improve relationships between community and law enforcement, ensure community understanding of rights and the legal process, and then also to have discussions on pressing issues of community members. They actually had a meeting this week, and they're working to get the logistics together and plan it out. And then I want to mention that we are now offering mental health first aid training. I was one of the new certified mental health first aid instructors, and I'll actually be doing my first training with Mr. White on October 5th at University of Tampa. Very excited about that, and we'll have some additional trainings that we will be doing soon, and we're asking any of our interlocal agencies and any JBB agencies to please request trainings with us. We want to get as many people in the community as possible to be trained on mental health first aid so that we can ensure that our community is cared for holistically. And then lastly, well, two more things and I'll be done, sorry. We have a public policy town hall that is coming up where we're going to be addressing mental health with a lot of our heads of our leadership council agencies to participate in addition to mental health practitioners. That will be taking place in December. We did have a date, but we have to move that date because it conflicts with the MAD candlelight vigil, and we want to be a part of that. So we'll have a finalized date today that they're waiting on me. And then we'll be able to share that information, but we're looking forward to that town hall, in addition to a listening session on mental health that will be specific to Youth Baker Act with our family health and well-being committee that we'll be doing in South County with Wholesome Community Church. And lastly, we are gearing up with our Safe Summit, our violence prevention conference. We are in need of volunteers to serve on various committees. So if you know anyone that is interested, or you yourself would be interested, or you can recommend someone from your agency to participate. This is a community effort, so we're looking for as many people to participate as possible. Our next meeting will be October 18th at the Children's Board at 3 p.m. It's usually the third Friday of every month, and the actual conference will be in August. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Just for those that's in South County, what contact or community groups are you reaching out to South County, Hillsborough County?
For the mental health?
Well, just for safe and sound overall.
Currently, we have two providers that we work with in South County, and that's Enterprising Latinas and Wholesome Community Church. But we're open to working with as many people in South County to reach that community as possible.
Okay.
So if you have some recommendations, feel free to give them to me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that update.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions, comments?
Good, thank you.
It's a lot. You guys are doing.
I know, he set
busy.
me up.
Feels like it. No.
What was that date again? I thought you said third Friday, which would be October 18th.
Yes, that's the correct day. For the,
What day is these meetings?
it's at 3 p.m.
Oh, okay.
And if you'd like me to share that information,
I can send you some.
you can send it to me, and I'd be happy to distribute it to
Okay.
our membership.
That would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I don't believe we have any old business or new business. So we'll move on to our presentation. And I want to welcome Miss Misty Ross here. She's with one of my most favorite organizations in the entire world, and one that Hillsborough County is better for have them chosen us as their home, Success for Kids and Families. And so Ms. Ross is going to talk to us today about their Healthy Minds program.
Yes.
And it's a very exciting development, and I want to welcome you and give you the floor.
Thank you. Am I good with the microphone here? Can everyone hear me? Feels very strange having you to my back, so I apologize. Just going to say that once. Okay, well, thank you all so much for giving me a few minutes of your time today. I know I was supposed to be here at the last meeting, but trust me, you did not want me to be here. I was very sick. So I am grateful that Elvin has put me on the agenda. Basically, I kind of just want to start with why am I here. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about early psychosis, what coordinated specialty care is, and the Healthy Minds program that I manage. So the reason that I'm here primarily speaking to you all today is because we know that individuals who experience psychosis are far more likely to have involvement in the criminal justice system. There's a really big study done in 2014 looking at 191 coordinated specialty care programs. And the researchers found that 70% of individuals in those programs had been arrested at least once, and 59% of them had been incarcerated. So obviously that's a much higher rate than our general population. That same study also revealed that this particular segment of our population experiences a longer delay in receiving treatment from when they first become symptomatic, which is about 2 years versus an average of 12 to 14 months. And this is really problematic because psychosis is, on a very basic level, a progressive illness. So the earlier you are identified as experiencing psychosis and begin receiving treatment, the better your prognosis is. Very similar to cancer. Long-term outcomes are just better. So ideally, individuals would be identified within 3 months. That is far from the reality that, we're experiencing right now. But so that's kind of the main reason I wanted to come and talk to you all today. I did bring some flyers and additional information over on the side table. And that particular study there's more information on it within the handout about criminal justice involvement for this population. Okay, so very briefly, I'm just going to give you an overview of what psychosis is. So on a very basic level, it's a loss of contact with reality. So person experiencing psychosis may have hallucinations involving one or more of the 5 senses. So they may see things that other people don't see, hear things that they don't hear, but can also taste and smell and feel things that other people don't or that aren't actually present. Delusions are also very common. These are firmly held false beliefs despite evidence to the contrary. These are just beliefs that an individual has that really impact their functioning. So delusions can be both bizarre or non-bizarre. Bizarre meaning not plausible, and non-bizarre meaning plausible. So like a bizarre delusion would be a person who believes that their organs were exchanged out with someone else's organs, but they have no scars or evidence to support that, right? Versus non-bizarre, a common one that you see or hear is that person who believes they're being spied on or followed or tracked in some way. Some of the negative symptoms you see mirror a lot of what you'll find in a person who's experiencing depression. So, lack of motivation to start or complete activities, a decrease in emotional response to, daily experiences, as well as a decrease in just speaking communication in general. And then you also can see disordered thoughts, speech, and behavior. So people experiencing these symptoms describe it as their thoughts are racing, they're very disjointed, disconnected, they have difficulty focusing, which can lead to, pressured speech that's incoherent, hard for, a typical person, so to speak, to kind of follow. And then this can also contribute to some, odd behaviors as well. Okay, so just kind of a little bit of an overview. Statistics-wise, 1 to 3% of our population in the U.S. Experiences or is diagnosed with a psychotic disorder. There are about 100,000 first episodes annually in our country. The average age of onset is 15 to 25, although it can happen as young as, we actually have a 6-year-old right now that we've just enrolled, and we've gotten referrals for individuals into their 30s and 40s. But typically you see it within this youth and young adult population. Estimated annual impact for on our country for people experiencing psychosis is $340 billion. You can kind of see the breakdown of how that kind of fleshes out. Individuals who have psychotic disorders have about a 50% substance use or abuse rate. So, drugs, alcohol, nicotine, a lot of self-medicating going on for sure with this population. And then you've got about a 10% suicide rate versus, I think, 1 to 2% for the general population. Some causes and contributors or risk factors, trauma, first and foremost. There's a growing body of research that shows that the more traumatic experiences you've had, the more likely you are to experience psychosis. So the top three, interestingly, are sexual abuse, chronic and severe bullying, and exposure to domestic violence. And there was one study that showed that if you have 5 or more ACEs, I'm sure everyone knows what an ACE is in here, that you're 193 times more likely to experience psychosis. So it compounds the more trauma you've experienced. Drugs and alcohol, as I mentioned, one thing I like to highlight here is that early and prolonged marijuana use is actually the most strongly correlated to developing schizophrenia or other types of psychosis. So it's that developing brain, 11 to 15, when you're seeing chronic use, they're at much, much higher risk of developing it down the road. Medical conditions such as traumatic brain injuries or dementia can cause psychosis. Genetics, so if you have a close relative in particular, like a parent, a child, or a sibling, you're at much greater risk of developing a psychotic disorder, which we are seeing. I would say about 90% of our participants so far have a relative, at least one, with schizophrenia or some other psychotic disorder. And then other mental disorders such as depression or bipolar disorder can also lead to psychosis or kind of have psychosis as a symptom. Okay, so, all right, so the program I manage, Healthy Minds, is a coordinated specialty care program, which basically is the gold standard. It's an evidence-based practice for this population. Just a little bit about the history and funding. These programs have actually been international for about 15, 20 years, primarily in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, have only recently come to the U.S. So there were some pilot programs done from 2009 to 2013, including one up in the Panhandle. And based on that data, the U.S. SAMHSA actually directed states to use 5% of their SAMHSA dollars to provide this specific service to communities. And then by 2016, they'd actually changed that from a recommendation to a mandate, bumped it up to 10%. And now you can find these programs in all 50 states. We're actually the 7th program in Florida, but some states have 20 plus programs, just depending on population and how they've kind of utilized their funding. Some of the kind of key components of this practice, functional recovery really is at the core of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. It's not really just a focus on symptom reduction, but really on just improving overall, health and wellness. Shared decision-making is very much central, whether it's the participant or the parent or both. We really let them drive the bus, so to speak. It's very much a psychoeducational program. So we are manual-based and use a lot of psychoeducation to kind of educate and support the individual as well as their family. Very much goal-oriented. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Care coordination services are provided by everybody on the team, and services are very intensive and are also time limited. So 2 years is the average length of time in a program, but no more than, our goal is no more than 42 months. And of course, contact and service delivery is, tapers off over time, is more, and is more intensive in the beginning. Okay, so Healthy Minds specifically, there are multiple coordinated specialty care models. The one that we use is called On Track, and it's actually started in New York, but now it's in, I think, 21 states. Nope, we'd be 22 because we are the first On Track program in Florida. The other programs in the state use a different model called Navigate, but we wanted to go with On Track because it has more of a strong peer component, which we very much believe in its success for kids and families. And also, there's just more recent and robust evidence to support outcomes with this model versus Navigate. So again, recovery-oriented services, manual guided. So it's structured, but it's also a little bit flexible. It's very much a collaborative model. We actually, our contract is actually with Central Florida Behavioral Health Network. They manage the funds and kind of oversee our services and delivery. So we have a contract with them to provide the services in Hillsborough County. So on our team, we have 2 employment and education specialists. I put them at the top on purpose because they really, I believe, are the most important people on the team, because for the most part, individuals don't come to us saying, help me get rid of these voices I'm hearing, or, reduce these positive symptoms, so to speak. They say, I want to stay in school, I want to work, I want to reach my life goals. And so that is where our C's, that's what, our acronym for them, come in. We have 2 primary clinicians on the team, a peer specialist who has lived experience, who's younger, and has, received services herself. We've got a family education clinician who's bilingual, in addition to our peer, both of them are bilingual. And she provides support and education to not only family members, but anybody that the participant identifies as supportive. So it doesn't have to be a family member. They don't have to reside with the person. If they're saying they want, this person on their team, then we're going to allow them to be on their team and serve them as well. Me, program manager. And then we have 1 prescriber, our psychiatrist, who is actually subcontracted with us. And she is absolutely fantastic. Her services, in addition to all others, are both office and community-based, so transportation is not a barrier. So we really just kind of want to make our services as accessible as possible. The other thing is that there are no costs associated for the individual. We do not bill health insurance. All of our services are provided through the block grant. The only thing we really don't have funds for is assistance with medication copays. Other than that, services are completely free of charge. Health insurance status is irrelevant. Legal status is irrelevant. Yeah. So. Okay, so just want to show you a couple of very short videos. These 2 individuals received services up in New York, and then I'll open the floor for questions after. Okay, well, where's my mouse? All right. Okay, uh-oh. Did it go? Oh, you know what? Hold on. Right. Oops, sorry. 1 second. Can I? No? Okay, sorry. I'm trying to pull it up in Chrome because I usually have better luck that way. But it is not, that is just not working. Okay. So let's do this. Okay, here we go.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I've experienced paranoia and I've heard voices, but right now I'm in recovery and I have a full-time job and I have a bachelor's degree and I'm doing good. My family tried to help me when I was paranoid. They would try to tell me basically to do what I do now, to use logic and to say to myself, why would this person be talking to me? What does this person have to gain by laughing at me or trying to come after me or something like that? And I would listen to their advice and eventually I was able to reason it out. Every time I had these episodes of paranoia, I learned from it. It was like a learning experience. And the next episode I would have wasn't as bad. And then eventually I just learned to talk myself out of having the paranoid thoughts. Plus, I think the medication also helps too. Journaling is a great way to get your thoughts out if you don't want to tell somebody what you're thinking. I've actually looked at a journal that about a year ago, 6 months ago, and I really saw how much I've evolved since then as well. I feel it's important to talk to somebody about paranoia because that's the way I dealt with it. I talked to basically friends and family members that I was close to, and I've talked to therapists about it as well. And to me, it kind of helped me to reframe my thinking. Leaving yesterday, I had a little experience. There were these teenagers on the bus, and sometimes they can trigger me, and they started pointing and laughing, and at first I got a little scared, and then I really, used my logic, and I said, oh, well, they're not laughing at me. They're just, going about their own business. And I realized how much gain I had made, because if this happened to me like 10 years ago, I probably would have been a lot worse. And right now, it didn't even faze me.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm 34. I work full-time as a civil rights advocate for individuals with disabilities. I recently graduated with a master's degree. I drive a nice car. I'm single. I enjoy dating. And I'm also in recovery from a form of schizophrenia. Today I want to talk about how crucial peer support was for me in my recovery. When I met the first peer, I was in a psychiatric hospital, a crisis unit, and I was at a moment of my most severely psychotic when I first heard the message of recovery. Up until that point, I was so hopeless and didn't think that there were any kind of, roles for me. I didn't think there was any hope. I didn't think I had the ability to work. So I was in an inpatient day room, and a fellow walked in and he asked the staff to leave and told us that he was there to do a group, that he didn't work for the hospital, and he proceeded to talk about his recovery, that he was a person who struggled with severe mental illness and alcoholism. He'd been homeless and in and out of institutions, and that one day he heard a message of hope and a promise of freedom that led him to develop a life where he now holds the key to the very same hospital, that he had been hospitalized at. When I heard this person talk about recovery and what he does for a living, I was so inspired that it gave me a vision of something better, for myself. So I started working with a peer and developed goals. And we wrote out this plan, and I listed, 6 or 8 long-term goals, a vision to get a PhD, to write books and movies that sort of contributed to a better world. One of the goals was to work for an agency that implemented my values. And I had never really believed that any of those things could come true before, but it was at that moment that I was filled with such hope that I believed, in my whole heart, that I could accomplish, each one of those goals on that sheet. For the first time, I thought that I could become the person that, I was meant to be. This is my independent living plan. On the front side, I wrote down what I thought the treatment team would want to hear if they read this. To take my meds and find the right treatment. Though part of me definitely wanted to find the right treatment. But on the other side, while I was in the hospital at my most ill, I wrote a list of long-term goals and aspirations that I really didn't believe were possible until I started on my recovery journey. I didn't believe I had the potential to make a film or write a book or work for an important civil rights agency. I didn't believe any of that stuff about me until I believed in me. I'd like to say to clinical staff that having a peer deliver the message that we each have the potential to recover at very critical times, particularly in our first episode, can be a defining moment. I believe having a peer to support us in our recovery as early as possible can really be the difference between a full recovery and a life in and out of various treatment programs and mental institutions.
Okay. So just very quickly, our eligibility criteria, which is on the flyer that I know some of you have and is over on the table to my right. Individuals to qualify, they have to be symptomatic no more than 2 years. This is all really kind of based on the evidence-based practice and recommendations for keeping to fidelity. Again, with that recognition that the earlier you begin treatment, the better your long-term prognosis is. They must live in Hillsborough County, cannot have a documented IQ below 70. A lot of programs require an 85, but we want it to be as inclusive as possible. We are already seeing the challenge with that 70 to 85 range, but we're working through it. Symptoms cannot strictly be a result of medical condition or substance use. We're a little bit flexible with that because, as I said, we know this population uses drugs and alcohol more often. So we try to gather as much info as we can ahead of time to determine if they're eligible. And then some information on how to refer there for you, as well as, my contact information is on the flyer. So if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or you can reach out to me, and I'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation or come out and meet with you or your team to provide some more information. And thank you all so much for your time.
Good job.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Ross?
Ms. Ross, real quick, thank you all for all the work that you're doing with Success for Kids and Families. You said we have 7 in the state.
7 in
What's
the
the nearest one to us other than Hillsborough?
Orlando is 1 month ahead of us.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Good stuff. Thank you.
And the rest are very far away.
One question. Where are you getting most of your referrals from right now?
Yeah, that's right now or from the beginning, because it's morphed already. Early on, we were getting a lot of referrals from, crisis stabilization units, primarily child serving agencies. We've now started to get more kind of youth and young adults programs referring, but a lot come from, Grace Point. We're getting more from the school system now that kind of we've been out there a few months getting the word out about the program. But quite honestly, some really just random places. I mean, friends, a Facebook group from one of our staff members, somebody in the agency whose friend's son needs support. I mean, they're just coming from very weird places. Some moms are just reaching out too.
And you indicated you're serving a 6-year-old. How are you dealing with the stigma, even diagnosing somebody prior to adolescence?
So, that is a very good question. So we actually just enrolled her. We have yet to really get into services. She's already diagnosed and receiving antipsychotic medication. Her father and aunt both have schizophrenia, and she has a pretty severe sexual trauma history, so lots of risk factors. We are actually consulting with Dr. Nev Jones here locally, but also she has linked us up with, his name escapes me, a national expert on early childhood psychosis out of University of Pittsburgh, who's giving us kind of some advice and guidance, provided us with a tool that we can use to interview her that's been developed. But so we're learning as we go, quite honestly, but. Yeah.
I think it's a great program. It's a great concept. Historically, the system has had to just watch people decompensate to the lowest level of functioning that they'll ever achieve, and then have no means of recovery. So kudos to you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're really excited. I just love being in a proactive role, and I feel like that's where we are. So thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Ross.
Yes.
Okay, I see no public comment. No one signed up for the public comment. Do we have any announcements?
Alvin, I just have one other thing that I forgot to mention, that we do have an upcoming GAP coming up, which is October the 16th, which is going to be at Bays, Florida, at 5:30. We have a lot of cops in line, and the youth are going to be coming from the program, so we're very excited. I'm going to send you the flyer so that you can kind of send it out to the members. And there have been some members that I have not had an opportunity to reach out to you just yet. Please, take that opportunity to kind of come and actually observe, because in that way you can kind of see what the gap really looks like. And that's all I got.
Excellent. Any other announcements? Okay, well, thank you all again for your time and attention to the juvenile justice matters in Hillsborough County. And seeing no further business, we will stand adjourned.